Hello and welcome to Watch From Home Theater, our way here at IGN and Cinefix to watch movies together even while we're apart. And today we are watching Night of the Living Dead. And good news is we'll be streaming the whole movie right here on the stream, and you can watch it along with us. Or it is also available for free in a handful of places if you want to get it on a second screen. There are links down in the description for different platforms where you can go and find it if you want to set it up on a different screen. So I personally rewatched it on Canopy. If you are like me and all about that public library life, get on that. But it's going to be a really fun conversation, watch along commentary. Again, we're streaming the movie right here. It's obviously Night of the Living Dead, crazy influential movie. And joining me this evening in our cozy little live stream, we have IGN's Lucy O'Brien. How you doing?
Hello, I am well, thank you. This is just such a delight. Night of the Living Dead is one of my favorite films of all time.
And of course, our very special guest, the executive producer, oftentimes director of The Walking Dead, special effects master, Greg Nicotero. Thank you so much for being here, Greg.
Hey, hi. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being invited to your studio. Oh wait, no, I'm in my house.
Yeah. No, that's great. This is has been a really fun thing for us to, even while I'm here in a corner of my garage. I see you're at home. You've got a handful of things behind you.
There's my car right there.
Is that
looks like the pod from 2001?
That's the pod from 2001 back there.
Well, listen, I mean, one of the greatest things about growing up a massive movie fan and a special effects artist is I've been able to build pretty much everything that I ever wanted when I was a kid. Like, I loved Lost in Space, I loved Jaws, I loved Alien, all these movies that influenced me when I was growing up. I've been able to either acquire props from the original movies or recreate them. So this room that I'm sitting in is kind of like my little display room in my house.
Do you mind giving us a quick little tour? What do you got back there?
I have to be careful not to trip over stuff because I got.
What's that small little thing to the right that I see? Just a tiny little detail. It seems like a little.
I'm gonna have to unplug my. All right, I'm gonna take you guys around.
Oh no!
Oh my god!
We're gonna walk around.
That is incredible.
I'm gonna end there though. Okay, so here's that's from a friend of mine, Steve Lang.
Oh, you got Freddy.
Right underneath it, behind it, there's the original crate from Creepshow.
Oh, cool.
Which is tucked there because I didn't have a chance to move that. There's a model of the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Yeah. And then there's my Lost in Space robot. Which, by the way, he turns on, but I don't have a free hand to turn him on.
Sure.
And then here's some various props from different movies. Logan's Run, Planet of the Apes. There's a replica of the two-faced character from The Thing. And then behind it on the wall, that's Drew Struzan's original poster sketch.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of the art on the walls, like there's original.
Honestly, the original sketch of The Thing, that's in the lead for me so far.
All right, well, I'm not done. Hold on.
Okay.
Wow.
I gotta move around. So then
this is my dream living room.
Okay, there's a Bernie Wrightson zombie sketch. There's a Ray Harryhausen sketch from Guanji.
Oh, wow.
And then as I do that, I move past some other props and oops, there's a face hugger on the floor. I almost just stepped on.
Look out. Look out, there are loose face huggers.
That painting in the middle there, that's the original painting from Ron Mahoney of the Dawn of the Dead poster book that came out when the movie came out, and you would fold it open. So I got that original painting. Then there's some more Drew Struzan. There's James Bauma's original guillotine model box art. There's my pod. And then
that pod
over here, there's a Wolfman hiding behind the pod.
See, now I'd like a version of 2001 where there's a Wolfman stowing away.
It was originally there. And then this is an alien that my friend Tim Miller did. It's pretty. Well, look, I got a little lens flare there too.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Oh yeah. Oh, that is so impressive.
That's
and then we go all the way over here.
Okay, so this is my dream. This is
Okay.
I want this.
Well, there's
I
a
can
very
offer
funny
you
story about
$100
this.
for this.
So
Let me find out what I have in my pocket right now.
when Jurassic Park came out, they, Stan Winston, who did all the effects, they made a couple display pieces that sort of toured the country. They did a raptor and they did a T-Rex. They did a couple crazy pieces. And what ended up happening was, I think those pieces ended up going to a private collector. So probably about 6 or 7 years ago, a friend of mine was like, hey, they're going to auction off like this T-Rex head from Jurassic Park, and it's out of the original molds. And I'd kind of always wanted one. And the bad part of the story is the day of the auction, I was really, really hungover, unfortunately. So the guy who owned the auction house called me. He's like, okay, we're getting ready for the bid. Are you ready? And I was like, yeah. And he said, just say yes or no. And then the first bid came up and I went, yes. And they went, going once, going twice, sold. And then he hung up and that was it.
That was
so
it.
In 30 seconds, I owned one of the replica T-Rex head from Jurassic Park.
I mean, we've all been there. We've all been too hungover to properly turn up at an auction to bid on a Jurassic Park T-Rex.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Like,
tale as old as time. So if that was an incredible tour, but if there's one thing in there, there's more. Hang on, okay.
God, because there's
I'm happy to see more. A whole other room.
I forgot. All right, but here, one other thing.
Real quick, while you're moving from one room to the next. What is that?
That's the painting for the European poster of The Thing.
Nice.
All right, I have to.
While you're moving from room to room, I can sneak in a question. There's already a question from Alicia in our YouTube audience asking if there's a way that we can win a trip to Greg's living room.
Oh,
some sort of
I've never done that before. Maybe.
Okay, we'll work out the details later.
Okay, so then this is that's a replica of the time machine that I built about 1 billion years ago.
Original.
Over there, Bob Burns has the original. There's a Pennywise and my friend sculpted, and then this is my giant nerdy Star Wars wall.
Star Wars wall.
Oh, okay. So yeah, dedicated Star Wars wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all like studio scale models. There's a cool X-Wing. And then if you go this way, there's all my weapons. So if anybody would try to break
the armory,
I would shoot them with a plastic phaser.
Sure.
And then this, which is a 5-foot Enterprise, which all lights up. I might have to plug it in just to finish the tour.
Hey, Greg, while you're doing that, if you could only save one of these incredible artifacts, what would it be?
Oh, shoot. That's a great question because my son, when we had the fires last year and they had to evacuate, my son ran into this room and was looking around going, Dad, what should I take? What should I take?
Oh, no.
And unfortunately, don't remember what he grabbed, but he's like, oh, I got this for you. And I was like, okay. But I was more worried about him just getting out.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, of course.
But probably the crate, but unfortunately the crate would like take up more space than my kids. So I'd have to choose.
Just so long as you get out of there with that entire T-Rex head, I feel like it wouldn't be bad.
Yeah.
I could, well, here's the beauty. I have a time machine. I could go back in time.
Sure.
There you go.
And save
just make a bunch of trips and you save everything. Yeah.
See, that would have been the smart answer.
So, Lucy, what do you have?
Okay, so look, I was hoping that you wouldn't ask me that question after that tour. Okay.
I had to.
All right, caveat. I moved to the United States from Australia in 2018 with 2 suitcases. And I could only bring one, basically one non-essential item. Okay. So I ended up bringing this face hugger. It Greg, you've got so many cool things, but I do appreciate, I hope you appreciate that this is the one thing that I saved in terms of my non-essential moving to a new country item.
Listen, that's probably much smarter than me because literally if I had and go, I would probably just sit on the floor and cry and not know what to do. Whereas you're just like, yeah, bye, I'm good.
Well, now we've got this wonderful video document touring the whole place. So worst comes to worst.
I've never toured this little room for anybody before, so it's it changes. I mean, listen, honestly, the funniest thing about it is, in the 2 weeks that I've been home, I come in every morning and I move stuff around. I'm like, no, that should be better over there.
Right.
Maybe it would look good. And I'm gluing little pieces back on that either got broken or, like when my kids come in here when I'm out of town, I come back and there's pieces on the floor. And I was like, hey, were you in the room? Like, no, I swear I wasn't. Meanwhile,
Do they call it do you call it the room?
The room.
I don't know what we call it. And so I was like, no, I'm like, I'm back in my room. Listen, guys, some people watch sports and have their man caves, and I have all this crazy props, which
this is much cooler.
Really, honestly, I mean, in this day and age where so many things are done digitally now, and there's less and less actual practical pieces that still survive. I think it's really important, and it's great to be able to preserve it, because when people look at like again, like looking over at that T-Rex head, I talked to my son and my friends about that. I'm like, these guys got hired to like build this giant mechanism that could make this thing move around. It's like looking at Jaws and thinking that, oh yeah, they just had to build a bus and pull it through the water and figure out how to do it. I mean, it's a tribute to all film technicians when they're given this task. So I like to think that this room and all these props are sort of like a tribute to all the people that kind of inspired me and made me realize that you can use your imagination and do something awesome.
Yeah. So. That's great.
That's amazing.
Well, speaking of things that inspire you, let's go ahead and sneak up on this movie here. So like I said earlier at the top, we will be watching it right here in the stream, so you can watch it along with us if you're watching at home. But again, there are links in the description if you want to go to a different platform. It's streaming for free all over the place because it's public domain, which is good news. So if you want to go ahead and get it queued up, spend a couple of minutes doing that. And in the meantime, Greg, I want to ask you, obviously Night of the Living Dead is a very influential film, but what does it mean to you?
Well, I can answer that question. Would take the entire movie. They shot the film about 20 minutes from where I grew up in a little town called Evans City. Like if you were to go to Pittsburgh tomorrow and go to the Evans City Cemetery, it's exactly the same. It's not like some developer came in and knocked buildings out and built new buildings, so it doesn't look anything like the movie. It is identical. And I think because part of when I first saw the movie, Bill Cardille, who plays the news reporter, was also the horror host in Pittsburgh on Saturday night called Chiller Theater. So him and George were really, really good friends. So every once in a while, probably when I was in, I think, 7th or 8th grade, they would play Night of the Living Dead on television, uncut, like without commercials, or maybe they had one commercial break, and then George would come on afterward. So the first time that I ever saw Night of the Living Dead was actually on television, and George was a special guest. And that kind of just blew me away. I mean, I had heard about it, like I had heard about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I had heard about The Exorcist, and I had heard about like Last House on the Left, all these movies that were kind of iconic. But when you're a 14 or 15-year-old kid, you're not supposed to see those movies. So
right.
Actually, I was younger because Dawn of the Dead came out when I was 15, so I had to be younger than that. So the fact that the movie scared me so much, and when you see later when we start running the movie, there's little chyrons that run across the bottom of the screen, and they're talking about where the rescue stations are. And I was like, I know where that is. I know where that one is. I know where that one. So it became really frightening for me, and it's kind of weirdly ironic that this movie is a movie that we're watching now, because people are they don't know what to do. And so a lot of people are like, well, maybe we should watch this movie to figure out what to do, or watch that movie. They don't know where to get their information from. And so George always, in my opinion, was always ahead of his time. And the movie was very real and very personal to me. And when I found out later that George he did all of his filmmaking in Pittsburgh, and everything that he did was there, it just changed everything for me.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Let's watch it. I hopefully everybody had a chance to get it queued up if they want to get it queued up. But otherwise, let's get it going. And so, Night of the Living Dead is 1968, correct?
I believe so.
Close enough. All right, let's go.
Should we talk about the first thing as the movie starts? Is the copyright, because
let's get the film going, and then we'll get into it. So if you are syncing up, let's go ahead and count it down from here we go. 3, 2, 1, play. There's a couple seconds of black right up top, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There we go.
There we go. That music.
Okay. So yeah, this first title card, Image 10 the company that didn't renew the copyright? Or
well, what happened was they changed the name of the movie at the last minute.
Right.
Because originally the film was called Night of the Flesh Eaters. And on that title card, they had the copyright when it said Night of the Flesh Eaters.
Yeah.
But when they changed the name of the movie at the last minute and replaced the title card with the new title, there was not a copyright on it. And it was just something that no one would have ever known or ever imagined. And ironically, it meant that legally nobody owned it.
Right.
It's devastating. I mean, if you really think about it, George Romero, like everything that we believe in terms of zombie movies, was his. Like he came up with the whole concept. He came up with, you get bit, you turn into a zombie, you got to shoot him in the head. All these, everything that now is literally part of pop culture, part of The Walking Dead, part of video games, part of everything is all based on Night of the Living Dead. So the fact that that he was unable to secure the copyright on it, it's tragic.
I mean,
it's crazy.
A movie that 50 whatever years later, obviously we're still sitting here talking about this movie, and that nobody really ever owned it in a strange way is just it's bizarre.
Yeah.
On a tangent, they never actually call zombies in Night of the Living Dead, which is of course a trend that kind of carried on throughout the years, where zombie was never explicitly stated.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, in Dawn of the Dead, the only reason that they refer to them as zombies is because Ken Foree is talking about voodoo. And there's that scene where he's on the balcony in front of the J.C. Penney's, and he says, my grandfather was from Trinidad, and there's no more room in hell. He refers to them as zombies. So I actually have a copy of the original shooting script from Dawn of the Dead with some handwritten scribbles in it. And one of those scribbles is the handwritten line where they refer to them as zombies. So they're ghouls or flesh eaters in Night of the Living Dead.
Right, because there were zombie movies before, like going back to the 30s and stuff, but
Romero completely popularized.
Yeah.
So these two,
they weren't flesh-eating creatures. They were, it was all voodoo and Haitian mythology.
Yeah.
I just remember vividly, like this scene actually chilled me to my bone more than anything that was to come. I don't know how you feel about this scene, Greg. Because the setup is so you can hear in the music, the setup is so tense, and these two poor people, but it's broad daylight. That was the reason why this scene is so chilling to me.
Well, what's interesting about this scene is we see Bill Heintzman, who's the first zombie. We see him in the background, and he looks very innocent, like ineffectual, and ultimately, the banter between the two isn't very necessary, but it sets up that you don't know what's going to happen. It's a great misdirect. So I love this scene, and if you really think about it, this movie is the only movie where you see the zombies pick up rocks and break windows, and I think there's another scene where you see one of them picking up I think it's a broken leg from a chair and bashing against the wall of the farmhouse, because there weren't any rules.
Yeah, you were making them up. Yeah.
And I think I even remember in the season 1 of The Walking Dead in episode 2, when the zombies were trying to break into the department store, there were some of them that were bashing against the window. And I remember saying to Frank Darabont, like, why did the zombies have weapons? And he's like, well, in Night of the Living Dead, the hiker picked up a rock and smashed the window. And I went, all right, well, I can't argue.
Can't argue with Night of the Living Dead.
You're right.
Is this movie something of a Bible to everyone who makes films or television or any kind of thing with zombies? I mean, is it still kind of the sacred text?
Well, it's sacred text in a lot more reasons than just zombie mythology. I mean, it really is kind of a brilliant film noir type movie. When I used to talk to George about it, he would say, well, listen, dude, when you have a zombie coming out of the shadows, we didn't have enough lights to actually light it. So we were doing the best that we can. So there's a really great shot of Jack Russo coming out of the shadows into the kitchen that comes up later. And it was always, to me, very, very scary. And George kind of laughed when we talked about that. And he's like, we only had like 2 lights. Like, I couldn't put any lights there. So
no,
I
love those like genius born out of necessity kind of moments.
Well, and I always feel like a lot of these filmmakers, when they're like, well, that wasn't my intent. I know in Dawn of the Dead, when everyone talked about like Temple of Consumerism and that it was like a satire. George always kind of said, oh, it's just a movie, and I got this great shopping mall and I shot there. But I still feel like deep down that had to come from somewhere. I never felt that George gave himself enough credit where it came to stuff like that because of that exact reason. Okay, so here's the first.
So the first zombie kill, and I will say it's this is probably pretty accurate to what a fight would look like, more so than we get in movies. Just random struggling.
Yeah, it looks like 2 drunk dudes.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I do like about all these old school fights in movies is that it's just
accurate.
Yeah.
Again, though, just the fact that it was in broad daylight just still like sends chills down my spine. There was no hiding.
And it's funny because you hear like there's lightning in the background, and George is obviously trying to add a little mood to it, because cemeteries in broad daylight aren't necessarily very scary, especially listen, I think the black and white makes a big difference, because by this time when this movie was made, everything was in color. So again, I think it's an aesthetic that George would have claimed was out of budgetary reasons, but again makes this one of the most scary films, because there's something, it's grainy and it's gritty, and it has a weird reality to it. If they would have shot this in color, you would have seen green grass and the green trees and everything. It wouldn't have had the same impact at all as the original, as a color movie.
Well, and the thing that you have to give credit for is just being who you are, right? Like if you don't have, like leaning into the resources that you have to make the right movie for, you only have black and white and like all the handheld thing, and just like leaning into what you have in a really ingenious way, I think is one of the things that makes this movie so good.
Well, I think that also adds to the classic vibe to it because
Yeah.
it puts it in the same category as like Frankenstein and The Creature from the Black Lagoon, all those classic horror movies. And then all of a sudden you have this film, you can't help but put it in that category because of the
Right.
fact that it has a similar kind of vibe to it, you know.
Mm.
So I know I'm a couple seconds behind you guys on my video feed.
Well, this is we're just at a it's the chase. It's the chase scene.
Which
But
again,
yeah,
that's when, she crashes the car. I love the car crash shot because it's all sound effects. It's all
Yeah.
sound effects, and the car was already dented. You can tell they just kind of pushed it in the frame.
with that with what you just sort of talked about, Greg, in terms of you can kind of categorize it with Creature from the Black Lagoon, etc., because it had the same sort of tone. By all accounts, at the premiere of this film, people went into it thinking it was kind of going to be a little goofy. People thought it was going to be kind of fun, like a matinee movie that dads could take their kids to. And by all accounts, during that premiere, people were very. The tone went from laughter to just no laughter at all.
Well, I think because and I hadn't heard that story, but I can imagine. Oh, I'm very backlit now. Sorry. Let me fix my. There we go. I think a lot of what it was too at that time period was the circuit that they would send the movie out on, because now we're sort of spoiled with. They open a movie in 2,000 theaters or 3,000 theaters.
Right.
But back in the day when you had low budget movies, you'd have probably 10 or 15 prints of a movie that they would have to literally take from one movie theater to the next movie theater to the next movie theater. So it created this sort of roadshow mentality. And I think when you have a movie like that that's like a roadshow mentality, it has that kind of Saturday matinee vibe to it. And I think that's where a lot of people got that impression about Night of the Living Dead. But again, once you get into the farmhouse and you're looking at the lighting and you see those shafts of light, it elevates it from something that is intended to be campy, which it never was, but it really gives it a different feel. And I just think that there's something interesting about the moment where George chooses not to use music and when to use music.
Sure.
And especially when she's in the farmhouse by herself, that music sting right there, which is when she sees the partially eaten, am I too far ahead?
Well, that was the music sting for the all the taxidermied animals.
Oh, yeah.
But hey, before we get too far away from the opening here, we had a question from Art, who's watching on Discord. He's got a makeup effects question for you. Why is the first ghoul we see not too heavily covered in makeup? I'm assuming that ghoul had just died, but is the first monster in a movie a big deal effects-wise?
Well, it really is about what impression you want to leave with the audience. And in that particular instance, it was intended to be a misdirect. We weren't supposed to notice that he was horribly disfigured because this zombie outbreak had literally just begun.
Yeah, he's just kind of shuffling in the background.
Yeah, and it's funny because in this movie, which is something that we don't do in The Walking Dead, is the idea that zombies come out of the ground, like that they're reanimated and they can crawl out of the ground, because that's such a classic kind of EC Comics vibe of seeing a skeleton that comes out of the ground and chases you around. And a lot of what is interesting about this movie is there's not a ton of special effects. There's enough, but most of the zombies just had, like a little dark coloration under their eyes, and on the day, I know Bill Heinzman was made up to be kind of pasty looking,
Yeah. And here we have,
they
I mean,
just kinda
just
look
a
like me
few
on a
minutes. Yeah, and then just a few minutes after that, anyway, she finds the sort of half decomposed body in the house. That's really gnarly looking.
Yeah, well, it's
So we
not
get,
decomposed; it's eaten. There's a
yeah,
difference.
yeah,
And I always remember because there's that weird snap zoom where
Yeah.
you don't, and you never really get a sense of what it is. Like first time I saw the movie, I'm like, wait, what was that? And then she runs out of the house and into the headlights,
yeah,
and then that introduces Ben. So
right.
it's again, I mean, it's such a cool use of light and dark,
Mhm.
and again, now there's no music, there's no sound, everything is just dead quiet.
Well,
And
and everything that the music sting that built and built and built right until Ben slams the door and they're back inside, and then it just cuts, which is really, really a cool effect. But and then here when we meet Ben, I always love how it just sort of like calmly practical Ben is throughout this whole
Yeah.
movie.
He's the
And
guy
it
that you
starts,
want to have by your side
yeah,
during this sort of
and it
zombie
starts
apocalypse.
just as soon as we meet him, which
Mhm.
I think is a great introduction to him.
well, it's interesting too because I always loved his backstory, which we get to in a minute, because he's seen it already, so he
Yeah.
knows what's going on. So his whole thing is he runs into this house. He's looking for somewhere to go to escape what he's just seen at the diner. So when he shows up and she's alone, he's looking at this as, okay, I need to find a place to hole up. And there's this woman who's clearly catatonic. He's not really thinking about her so much because he thinks it's her house. He's like, is this your house? Is there anybody else around? He's just immediately looking for a place that he can hide out.
Mm.
Yeah. There's something else too about, you mentioned that we get Ben's backstory a little bit later, but structurally, one of the things this movie does really well is just throwing us into the middle of something and trying to figure it out along with the characters.
Yeah.
Which I think is great.
Well, that's always a great device, because as long as you can take the audience on the journey with you, it's a super effective tool. And most films, that's what they do. They want you to identify with the character so that you can go on the journey with them. But again, I think Night of the Living Dead actually benefited from a little bit of its low budget status, because they didn't have giant movie stars in it, which I know is another big sort of calling card of a lot of George's movies, which was playing into that idea that these are everyday people that you might not recognize, so you might identify with them a little more as just everyday people.
Yeah.
And was that the first head blow we saw? The first proper, like, this is how you get rid of a zombie, is you get them in the head.
Well, yeah, I mean, that we see the zombies smashing the lights in the car with rocks. But what's interesting about this is it teaches you the rules by not
Yeah.
telling you the rules, but showing you the rules. Like he shoots the
Right.
zombie and the zombie backs up and he's got it in the chest, and then he cocks the gun and shoots it again. And then he cocks the gun and shoots it again, and it's when he shoots it in the head that it dies. So George was teaching us the rules without having to say, oh, by the way, that's what you have to do. So that bit's coming up. Yeah, I'm unfortunately I'm about 20 seconds behind you guys.
That's okay.
That's all right. That's all right.
Jack Russo coming into the kitchen and coming up behind Barbara, that was that sort of film noir with the darkness piece that I was talking about earlier.
And this is where, and especially for the time, like this is violent.
Yeah.
Like just stabbing a guy in the head with a tire iron and then struggling. It's honestly, it's the struggling to pull it out that I think is weirdly more sort of visceral than the actual stabbing.
Yeah, and also just like with the zombies themselves, they still feel very human-like. You know, it's sort of hard to categorize, especially these sort of early early zombies, it's really hard to categorize them as zombies straight away because they just look.
Yeah, it was just a dude in his bathrobe.
Dark circles. It's just someone who's just a bit
Right.
off, and I think that's very unnerving.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if you think about the time that these movies were made and the types of films that were being made in the late 60s, I mean, it was a very rebellious time, and a lot of filmmakers found ways to express what they thought and how they felt, and horror films in general are always rebellious by nature. So for George to be more graphic was I always felt was his way of being rebellious of what was going on. And Toby Hooper did it, Sean Cunningham did it, and Wes Craven. I mean, all those filmmakers at the time.
Greg, I mean, I'm so curious about that because for many, many years, directors sort of that air more towards mainstream Hollywood have kind of sort of shied away from the term horror. I'm sure this isn't unusual to you, but the term horror, they don't. As soon as their films are categorized as horror, a lot of them will say no, it's a social thriller or a domestic thriller.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like no one wants to say horror out loud. Psychological thriller as if it's a dirty word, and yet horror still persists. It persists as a genre. It has always persisted. It has always been rebellious, exactly as you said. Do you think we're ever going to see the tides turn where mainstream directors are actually going to embrace their films as horror? I mean, especially nowadays with Jordan Peele, etc. And
well, listen, I don't think it's directors that actually have that opinion. I think it's distributors,
right,
because the directors, they're going to embrace the movie that they're going to make, but it's how do you sell it? How do you sell that movie? And for such a long time, horror films were lowbrow. They were considered, they were considered exploitation. And a lot of times people didn't want to take it seriously because they just went, oh, well, it's just an exploitation movie. It's too gratuitous. It's got nudity. It's got violence. It's got too much gore in it. But what I think a lot of people didn't realize is that there was, obviously with us, there was a group of people that responded to that. And whether it was because we wanted to see it, like, oh, I want to see what they're telling me I'm not supposed to see. In my case, I was really, really into special effects when I was younger, and the Hammer horror movies. I mean, look at the original Universal movies, and then in the '60s when the Hammer movies came out, everything was in color, everything was gorier, everything was a little sexier. But ultimately, a lot of times people just looked down on horror as it was just beneath them because it was exploitation. There are a lot of filmmakers that made some fantastic horror movies, and I really do think that with Walking Dead and American Horror Story and a lot of current television shows, that sort of made horror mainstream. And I think that's one of the things that is great about current television is that people that normally wouldn't watch this kind of show are now watching it because they realize that it's not necessarily about the gore, but it's about the human condition told in whatever backdrop it is, whether it's a Western, whether it's a musical, whatever it is. And in terms of horror movies, they've chosen the backdrop of this world.
Flesh eaters,
right. Well, here's a question that's sort of building off of what you're talking about, talking about the human condition in the backdrop of flesh eaters in this instance. Charlie Talbert, who's watching on Discord, asks, do you feel that the dynamic of Ben and Barbara pretty much sums up how we would act in this scenario? Which I sort of take to mean there's your two choices. You can either kind of shut down, or you can be like the cold, practical, let's just figure out how to survive that Ben is.
Well, I think as the movie progresses and more characters are introduced, each character has a different perspective and a different take on what's going on. Everybody that's hiding in the basement, they're doing it out of self-preservation. But with the two of them, I don't know, because I think I'm so used to the film where Barbara, I don't know if this Barbara would exist today. Some woman who's so scared that she's reduced to this catatonic state. That feels very much like a woman that would have been portrayed in the late 60s. I don't know if in present day Barbara would react the same way. And I know when Tom Savini did the remake of Night of the Living Dead in the 90s, he changed Barbara's character to sort of more reflect a modern take on what a woman would do in this situation.
I mean, we've definitely all asked ourselves how we would react in a zombie scenario. And I think I think that there's a middle ground to be had between these two.
Yeah.
I think Ben is wonderful. I think Barbara's too much. But I think I would fit in somewhere in between the two. How about you, Greg?
Well, that's a hard question for me to answer, because I've been living in this world for 10 years and looking at how the world changes people and how quickly people change based on what they feel is the right thing to do. Because we really, in Night of the Living Dead, we really never learn what anyone's motivations are, except to survive. Ben doesn't have anybody that he's protecting. Barbara doesn't have anybody. When we meet the rest of the characters, they have Harry has the most motivation of anybody, is he's protecting his family. So I think Night of the Living Dead eases us into this world by introducing us to solitary characters who really have nothing else invested in the game other than to protect themselves.
Which is exactly where you want to be in a zombie situation.
Well, yeah, I guess so.
just by yourself trying to survive, right?
That would be
screw everyone else.
Yeah.
A little boring after a while, I think.
Right. See, and here's where you were mentioning earlier, where we're getting all of Ben's backstory. So, and just describing the scene that he witnessed earlier is pretty weighty. How do you think? I mean, is there a version of this movie where we saw that originally, and then I guess if it's exclusively Ben's movie, maybe we start with that scene.
Well, I always loved that story, and if I'm not mistaken, I think somebody did. It might have been John Russo, actually, did a deluxe cut of Night of the Living Dead and actually shot that scene. I think that there is a version of Night of the Living Dead that George had nothing to do with, where that scene was shot. I'm not 100% sure. I just remember seeing like a zombie makeup on a waitress with like a Beekman's Diner name tag or something on it. But again, I love that backstory. In my head, I think what George did so well was he planted the visuals in your head, so you saw it without having to see it. And that's always a sign of a great filmmaker, is that they can plant the visuals in your head without you having to see it. So by the time you do see what these zombies are capable of doing, it's so horrific that you don't want to look.
And again, like it's almost like a piece of theater, it's almost like we don't need to jump back in time, jump forward in time. Like we are right there in the room with these people experiencing exactly what they're experiencing in real time. And I think that's so effective.
Well, because ultimately it's really Barbara's story. If it would have been started with Ben in the diner, it would have been Ben's story, not Barbara's story. And I think it's important to remember that, because even though her character kind of disappears for a little while when we introduce, like you said, Lucy, it's like a play. there's one character who's just sitting there, on the stage, sort of that the audience kind of forgets about for a minute as we introduce the new players.
And he said, "Oh, it's late. Why did
Even
late?"
even this bit where she's kind of. I always thought his reaction was like, "You just need to calm down now," because she's actually coherent enough to respond to him and try to explain what happened, but she's so traumatized that she can't get it out in any way, shape, or form that makes sense to him. But he's just like, listen, you just need to, like, he won't even let her talk.
Yeah, this would not fly in 2020.
Right.
Barbara. And I laughed at him and said, "Johnny, stop it." And then Johnny ran away.
And by all accounts, so much of the script was improvised as well. It was a script in progress. It was kind of a living document every single day of the shoot. And basically the actors were sort of, they kind of just did what they thought they should do. And I feel like that, I love that. And, in many ways it makes it feel a lot more organic, I suppose.
Well, it feels real, I have a copy of the script that I got from one of the producers, and I always love the exercise of reading the scripts and watching the movie. Anytime I've ever seen a film, I try to find the script because I'm very curious as to what was on the page versus how the director interpreted it.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like looking at like John Carpenter's The Thing. If you look at that script, there's not descriptions of, and then the chest split open and then the head crawls across the ground. None of that was actually in the script. So I'm always really interested to see how the script describes things that we've seen, because that to me is a really interesting part of the process. The screenwriters write it, and then the directors visualize it, and then he surrounds himself with his crew. And in the case of Night of the Living Dead, it was all of the actors. Like most of the actors, did makeup and did lighting, and Marilyn Eastman and so many of them used to tell me that there was Image 10, I think, was the 10 people.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Was the company. And a lot of them would, when they weren't acting, they were doing makeup and they were helping out. And that, I love that vibe. I know Sam Raimi did it when they did the first Evil Dead. It was the same thing. It was like they got a bunch of investors from dentists and doctors in Detroit. And then there was a couple guys that went off and made a movie. And there's just something, Evil Dead is a really great comparison movie to Night of the Living Dead because there was a rawness to it. And even though in certain instances it might have felt amateurish, that actually plays into the relatability of the movie,
How do you feel about the theory? Oh, sorry, Clint. I'm building on that. How do you feel about the theory that, Friedkin held this theory when making The Exorcist that, if the actors were genuinely scared or genuinely uncomfortable physically, he would get a better performance. Obviously, in the case of The Exorcist, it was quite infamous, what he put those actors through. Do you think that theory holds any weight, especially in 2020?
Well, I do believe that in a lot of instances, I try to preserve as much as I can with the actors when I'm working with them on The Walking Dead and Creepshow. I think the more that something is shocking to them or a surprise to them, there's that great story, which I still would love to really know if it's true, that when they shot the chest burster scene from Alien, they took all the actors out and they brought John Hurt, they put him in, and then they brought the actors back in and they shot him.
I mean, that's what everyone's heard. That's an infamous story.
I love the idea that nobody knew they were going to get squirted in the face with all the blood.
I have a hard time believing
Right.
that the actors wouldn't know that. But there are a lot of instances, especially back then. I just recently rewatched Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is one of my favorite movies. And I found the script online and I bought it because I really wanted to that movie's so stylized with the lighting, very much like Night of the Living Dead, like the underlighting that gives it that dramatic, the wide angle lenses and the way that it was shot. And I got to the last page of the script, and I'm not going to ruin it for people who haven't seen it yet. If you haven't, you can watch it. And then the last page of the script, it just says, you just have to wait and see. Like, they didn't distribute the end of the movie to the actor. That was you got to think, that was a gimmick. Back in the the 60s and the 70s, when Mark of the Devil came out, part of the gimmick was they would hand out barf bags.
Yeah.
So you would go to the theater and you would get a barf bag. How many people went to the movie just because they're like, I want to see a movie that they have to hand out a barf bag?
Yeah,
So
of
a
course.
lot of these things were gimmicks. So I believe, Lucy, you might remember, but I think that there was an insurance policy taken out for people that would go to see Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
That if you went to the theater and you died of a heart attack, you would get $1 million. I know that William Castle did it for The Tingler or 13 Ghosts. House on Haunted Hill. I know there was like an insurance policy, but if I'm not mistaken, there might have been some part of the gimmick with Night of the Living Dead as well.
That's
again,
incredible.
it's done purely to get people into the theater. So,
and I would go in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And Hitchcock loved doing all that stuff as well. He loved playing it up.
I know, yeah, in Psycho, he was like, they wouldn't admit anybody into the theater for the last 20 minutes because they didn't want to ruin it for the people. And, listen, going back to what we were talking about earlier about that sort of roadshow idea of Night of the Living Dead, I think because there was no copyright, people could screen it over and over and over again without having to pay royalties on it. Like, the distributor probably got the money, but that money didn't have to go to. A lot of people got rich off that movie, and one of them, unfortunately, wasn't George Romero and the team. But when you have these midnight movies, and I think that's where Night of the Living Dead really started to catch on, was that people like, wait a minute, you can go to a movie theater at midnight and watch a horror movie? I saw Dawn of the Dead at the midnight movie probably 8 times. And by the time the movie had been released for like a year, people had gone in and cut out all the gory bits because people wanted to keep the frames of the head exploding. So at one point I went to see the movie and it was like, look out, there's a zombie. And then it would jump like 5 seconds to like the people walking away. I'm like, where's the zombie?
Oh, these people were actually stealing the frames of film to keep?
Frame grabs. Yes.
Oh no, like
man.
a crappy TV cut.
That's awful. Hey, everybody, if you're just tuning in for us, we are right in the middle of watching Night of the Living Dead with Greg Nicotero. Be sure, wherever you're watching, if you're on YouTube, Discord, whatever platform you're watching, leave comments and questions if you want to get us to ask them. We've got one here from somebody watching on Discord. This is Brandon. Asks, were there any effects techniques that you saw from Night and Dawn and your work on Day of the Dead that are still relevant to your work on The Walking Dead? Any tricks that you learned that you still use?
Well, listen, just the idea of using prosthetics to transform people. I love the idea of what Savini did in Dawn of the Dead. There was a lot of reverse photography. The machete in the head, where you put the machete there and you pull it back and you reverse it. So when you play the film, it goes choom and it sticks in, and it looks like a genuine impact. We use reverse photography a ton, more so on Creepshow, I'll be honest, than on The Walking Dead, because We have very little money for the Shutter AMC Shutter show of Creep Show, so we're really, really kind of forced to be more creative. I love that. I mean, I like the idea that there isn't an easy solve to it, but blood pumps and severed heads and all that kind of stuff. The technology really has gotten us to a very unique place. But one of the appealing things about Walking Dead and Creepshow is that we still do a tremendous number of those gags practically. And the idea that Tom Savini learned from Dick Smith. Dick Smith, who of course did The Exorcist and The Godfather and Taxi Driver. Dick was a very, very forthcoming person when it came to sharing his technique. So he would put these pamphlets together and send them out to different makeup artists. And if you picked up the phone and you would call Dick Smith, he would spend hours explaining to you how it was done. So when Tom became interested in special effects makeup, he really reached out to Dick Smith, and Dick Smith on the East Coast, Dick was in New York and Tom was in Pittsburgh. He really embraced giving that information to any artist that wanted it. And that huge boom between like 1977 and 1985, 86, where it was Rick Baker and Rob Bottin and Stan Winston and Tom Berman, and all of a sudden everybody was embracing practical makeup effects, and there was that huge explosion of The Thing and The Howling and American Werewolf in London and Dawn of the Dead. And I would say the next big explosion would be in the mid 90s with Jurassic Park and The Abyss, where it went into digital creature effects and stuff. But I feel like now we're kind of shifting very much into embracing practical stuff. And I would happily say that Walking Dead, I think, is a big part of that, because we do practical makeup.
I definitely feel like there was, a tipping point for digital horror effects, where it just, I'm speaking just for myself. I don't know how you two feel, but it just became not scary. It just became not scary because you could tell it was orchestrated by a computer. And we grew up with practical effects, and they're sort of ingrained in our psyche. And now I recognize practical effects like that.
Yeah.
And it really does make such a difference. And you mentioned, Greg, that you're seeing that tipping point has come down the other side and more people are using practical effects. Of course, in TV, are you seeing that across like Hollywood and indie horror as well?
Well, I wouldn't say they're using more practical effects, but for a while there, as soon as visual effects became very popular, nobody wanted to build puppets. Nobody wanted to do anything practically because everybody wanted to play with the new technology.
Uh-huh.
But truth be told, a lot of filmmakers that are now coming into their own, and I wouldn't say recently, I would say in the last 10 years, Alex Aja, Guillermo del Toro, Eli Roth, a lot of these guys, they had with Guillermo, he was a makeup effects guy. Like they had practical knowledge of creature effects. So they wanted to use those techniques because those techniques are what inspired them. So I feel like we're at a place now where people appreciate and understand the value of it. Whereas when digital effects became very popular in the late 90s, everybody wanted to be the ones to do, oh, look, we did it better than that guy, and we did it better than that guy. And, I still feel like practical effects and digital effects have a very relevant place in storytelling. I worked on Battle Angel Alita with Robert Rodriguez and Jim Cameron, and I'm still blown away by what can be done. I think it's really, but then I watched 2 days ago, I watched Aliens again.
Yeah.
And I realized that Aliens was done before computer technology existed. And Jim Cameron, I really feel like Aliens is probably virtually a flawless movie because he used every technique in the book. He used forced perspective miniatures, he used quarter scale puppets, he used guys in suits, rear projection. Anything that you can think of to tell his story. And I feel like as filmmakers and people that are watching now and listening to what we're talking about, they have the advantage of using a multitude of tools to tell their story.
So here, well, getting back into the movie, here's where we meet the rest of the cast that's been hiding in the basement. And like we were talking about earlier, here's where we get a little bit some more perspectives on how to react to what's happening. So you got Mr. Cooper, who's frankly an ass.
But even though he's an ass, he's still, and we deal with this on The Walking Dead on a daily basis. He he has a right to defend
Sure.
what he feels is important.
And ultimately,
Now,
he's not super wrong.
right now, he's not necessarily a giant asshole.
Right.
He's just being kind of a pain in the ass. But it's later when he exhibits the abhorrent behavior, which I'm not going to say for the three of you that have never seen the movie before.
Right.
Everybody else has probably seen it. But again, it's one of the things about a great horror story is putting yourself in that character's place. Like, who would you be? I know we talked a little bit about that earlier, but it's that sort of relatable world of like, who would you be in this moment or that moment?
It's a good jump scare there with the hands diving through the windows.
Classic image.
Yeah.
I love the fact that they think that like those three boards that are nailed across the window.
Right.
Yeah. I know.
Make a difference.
I love the idea that a home.
This is the gun bit coming up. Now, again, I'm a little bit behind you guys, but I can hear the music, and I think we're at that moment where Ben goes outside and shoots the zombie.
Yeah, he's just shooting a guy through the window, and guy gets shot in the chest and just walks right back.
Yeah, so that's the bit that I was referring to earlier when he shoots the zombie and then the zombie steps back and then it walks towards us again. Now, this is really the first time that we're realizing that these creatures are not as easily dispatched.
Right.
And again, what I always love about this movie is the use of the shadows of the plants on the faces. There's something really unique about, and again, sort of knowing that, they're holding branches in front of the lights, but they're telling the story visually. And I think, George, even when it just happened a second ago, but when you reveal the hole in the zombie's head, there's a little branch that's just across the forehead and just moves. I remember how if you look at the reveal of this nude zombie, which I remember was a big deal, because it was like in the late 60s, it was a nude woman, and she was. But if you watch that shot again, you can see that there's like a perfect shadow that just follows her.
Just obscures it.
Yeah.
Just enough.
I mean, we're talking a lot about like how the techniques that Romero used in this film and sort of how it all added up to be this great movie. But like talking about the remake that Savini did, and we've touched on it a little bit. There's a handful of comments and questions from people that are watching. One is Alifizzle 18. Sorry if that's not how you want to pronounce that, but that's what it says. You're watching on YouTube. What did you think of Tom Savini remake of Night of the Living Dead, and how does it stand up to the original movie? How does it compare?
Well, I like the movie. I understand. It ended up being a lot more of a makeup effect showcase, because at that point when there were a lot of movies that were coming out, they were featuring the creature effects, and I think there was a few changes that were made in the script that I thought were kind of interesting, but again, it's like remaking Jaws. I mean, Night of the Living Dead is such a perfect movie that Tom really had his hands full with the subject matter. And Tom's a dear friend of mine. He's one of the greatest. He's one of the greatest guys that I know. So, it's like being handed a classic and then trying to reimagine it. I know he had a very different vision for the movie that was the film that we ended up seeing. But I wasn't there. I didn't work on the movie. I wish I would have been able to be there because I was very close with George and very close with Tom at the time. But I think we were doing, I don't even remember what else we were. K&B had been in existence for probably 2 years then, and we were kind of on our way to sort of chugging along.
Your effects company, right? Yeah.
I'm very curious as to whether you like what kind of conversations you had with Tom, because you've been friends with Tom for so long. What sorts of conversations you had with him about the remake at the time? Did you sort of, did you ever be like, what are you doing? Like, this is insane. It is like remaking Jaws.
Well, honestly, if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons that it was remade was because that was George's way to resecure the copyright. Because I think so many years after the film was in public domain, they were able to recopyright Night of the Living Dead with that film. And I think that was one of the main reasons why they wanted to do it. George didn't want to make it because he had already done that movie. So I think that there were some legal reasons why they remade the film. But again, I felt like seeing that movie in color and seeing the farmhouse in color, and it didn't feel like Night of the Living Dead to me.
Yeah.
And I think there had been so many other zombie movies that had come out between Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead, because you had all the Italian horror movies, Lucio Fulci movies,
Right.
so many other zombie movies that came out that were just shocking. One of the best makeup effects that I've ever seen in my life is the splinter in the eye in Lucio Fulci's Zombie. Still one of the greatest makeup effects, hands down, that I've ever seen. So you couldn't really compete with those movies. You couldn't compete with a lot of those Italian horror movies that just were so outrageously gory and so
and attacking sharks too, right? Like that's
it's still one of my favorite.
Once you attack a shark, what's the next frontier to conquer?
I'll never forget. I was working on Inglourious Bastards, and Jake Garber and I were putting Brad Pitt's scar on his neck every day for the movie, and we started talking about that movie, and he's like, "Wait a minute, there's a movie with a zombie and a shark that fight?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." And I remember Quentin coming up to me later and saying, "Don't show him that scene. I'm going to have my print of Zombie flown to Berlin, and we're going to watch it because Brad Pitt just like we'd be on set and like, so wait a minute, there's a zombie and a shark." Like he just couldn't imagine it.
Yeah.
So
do not show him that scene on your phone. I'm flying a print.
Scene on the internet. Because Quentin wanted him to see the whole movie. But every once in a while, I'd see Brad off to the side doing this. And I'd say to Jake, I wonder if he's trying to figure out the zombie shark fight again. I don't know.
Hey, just moving back to the movie for a quick second. Now, this scene, again, was, well, this whole kind of sequence was one of the parts of this film that stayed with me when I first saw it. Now, this little girl, what is her name? Karen, is that right? What's the little girl's name? Might be Karen.
Karen Cooper.
Now, this, again, it affected me in the same way that The Exorcist affected me, in that it was one of the first kind of moments in a horror film that I'd seen a little kid be, well, possessed or in peril or in some way kind of twisted and against the grain, so to speak. And I found it absolutely terrifying because from this instance, that she's going to turn. No one gets better from a zombie bite. And I just,
Yeah, we didn't know that at the time, which is
you hear,
but we do now.
Well, you heard Ben's
Look, this
story.
movie is 50 years old. It's fine.
No. But I'm just saying, listen, I agree. And again, if you really think about it, making little kids monsters was super taboo back then.
Yeah.
Like you didn't touch it. I mean, even if you think about the subject matter of like Kubrick and Lolita and like the taboo, you never even got near little kids in movies at all. So with this particular bit, which was before The Exorcist, and then of course I think Carrie was 1971, I want to say.
Yeah.
But when you start taking something that is taboo and you're turning the convention on its head. Again, I was terrified by the end of this movie as well. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves, of course,
Right.
but because children are supposed to be the one thing that will never hurt you. They have this unconditional love, and I think the zombie genre in itself, the idea that somebody that you love would become this inhuman shell that would want nothing more than to just devour you. I mean, it plays into every single primal fear. You know, if you go back to like medieval times and like the text about werewolves and like, the drawing between books of like werewolves, they come out, they steal babies. Like they drew a baby, a werewolf stealing a baby for a reason. So they wanted to manipulate you into thinking no one would ever do something as inhuman as interfering with pure innocence, which is a child. So I think again, that sort of rebellious moment. And now we get into the TV station. This was what the news report. This was what screwed me up so much when I was a little kid, because when you see the news report and they're talking about the rescue station, those were literally 20 minutes from my house, a half an hour from my house.
Yeah. Well, that's the fun thing too that I really like about this whole sequence and watching the news report and then the reporters following the people that we get to here in a second is it gives it that sort of War of the Worlds, like, wait a second, this kind of feels real right now all of a sudden vibe.
Right.
That
George
is
loved that. George loved the War World. He loved the Orson Welles radio show. And the funny story about that beat where the reporters are in front of the Capitol building. I've heard so many stories about the fact that they drove up in a car, they jumped out, they filmed it, they jumped back in the car, and they drove away. But they didn't have any permits to even
that
do
feels
that.
right.
Yeah.
So it looks that way, I mean, when
Right.
you see it.
Well, and even the energy that the actors have between each other feels like that. It's like they talked about it for 10 minutes beforehand, and they're harried, and it feels right and true for the scene because there's these bureaucrats or politicians that are freaks, and we're not even to the scene yet, so maybe we shouldn't be talking about it.
No, we were getting a little.
It's hard not to get ahead of yourself.
As soon as they turn the TV on it, because I love that scene, and so as soon as they turn the TV on, I'm like, ooh, yeah, I love that scene.
I just lost. Hold on, I gotta go. I gotta catch up again. I think I just got behind you. Rescue stations.
Rescue stations.
So we have that truck. If we can get some gas, we can get out of here.
There's a pump out by the shed.
I know, that's why I pulled in here, but it's
I'm
locked.
waving to see if
I love the minute-to-minute goals in a zombie movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we've got to get a truck now. Okay, now, and then after the truck, we got to get gas for the truck. We got to do X. It's like these incremental goals that are very small on paper, but absolutely massive.
Yeah,
practice.
it's find a place to hide.
Yeah.
Board up the windows.
But in this
Then
instance,
start thinking about escaping.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a difference, and what I always found interesting is they're like, oh, well, if we get to a rescue station, everything will be fine.
Right.
They're in this remote farmhouse location, so they feel like wherever they are, it's not as safe as getting to the rescue station, which I love. And again, the beginning of Dawn of the Dead picks up where they're doing a news report and they're talking about martial law has been instated, and people can't, you can no longer inhabit private residence. You have to go to these rescue stations.
Mm-hmm.
So I always remember never really quite understanding when I was a kid, when I was 15 and I saw Dawn of the Dead, never understanding the whole attack on the tenement building where the SWAT team goes in. Like when I was a kid, I was like, what's happening? I didn't understand. And later I was like, oh, the SWAT team is called in because those people refused to leave.
Yeah.
They refused to leave the building. So now in Night of the Living Dead, they have somewhere they go that they believe is safe. And that's where the first conflict arises, because they're like, well, we got to get out of here, but we can't move Karen, we can't do this, and now it's like, well, why do they have to stay? Well, because there's only one car. So the script very, very intelligently sets up these roadblocks. If there were two cars, it would be fine. They'd be like, okay, you take that car, I'm taking that car, let's just go. But it's the idea that they're isolated in this desolate farmhouse where no other help, there's nobody else around, and more people are drawn to the front porch.
And here's a great scene with the interview. Just hopping in a car and driving off before anybody comes and shuts down the chute. The one other thing that I love about that scene is that they introduced the idea that the zombies are potentially being caused by radiation from a satellite that just returned from space, which I love that. And it actually brings me to there's a comment or a question from Decatron IG on IGN's YouTube, asking if you have a favorite cause of zombies. Do you have a preferred cause of zombies? Like, is it radiation or chemicals or biohazard or anything like that?
How could we possibly?
Well, I remember the radiation idea, which seemed to make sense to me, because the idea that that the satellite that returned to Earth and had something on it that created this radiation. I always liked that idea, maybe because that's the first and the original idea. I loved Return of the Living Dead. I got to say, the barrel of trioxin when they burn the corpse and it goes up into the clouds and then comes back down in the rain. Super funny and clever. I don't know. It's just fun. I mean, it's fun to speculate. I always thought even the Resident Evil bio warfare idea they're all different, which is what makes it fun, because you're like, oh, that's interesting.
Well, that's the other cool thing too is it can kind of be a product of sort of zombie films changing with the times in terms of like social commentary. Obviously, like space and radiation and all of that was a big that was
in the 60s. Yeah.
Listen, and by the time you get to 28 Days Later, it's all it's
28 Days Later really did a good job of that, because it sort of isolated it to Great Britain, which I thought was interesting. The one scene where he's looking up and he sees the plane flying over, and you're like, oh, interesting. But it was the rabid, rage-filled monkey, or
just a rage monkey.
It happened.
I'm really curious, like, how important do you think an actual explanation, and not just in zombie movies, but in horror movies in general, how important is an actual explanation as to what is going on? Do we actually need one?
That's a great question, because so many films in the 70s, they left things open-ended. Like it would just end, and they were like, well, we're going to let the audience decide. Like Black Christmas, and there were so many great movies in the 70s that always had that last little twist. And I think because I grew up in that era of like, sure, I don't need everything tied up in a tight little bundle. I think a lot of it was because there were times when either they couldn't afford to do it, or they didn't have they liked being a little more artistic. films in the late 60s and early 70s were experimental. Let them get an experimental. I mean, so to leave things to the imagination, I always thought was interesting and kind of fun. But I know in this day and age, everybody needs everything explained to them. They need to know why it's happening. My 14-year-old daughter loved horror movies, and we watched a film on Netflix called The Platform the other day, Spanish horror movie. And he was like, I need to know what the ending means. Like, she would like to look it up. And I said, sometimes it's not about what it means at the end, but it's taking you on the journey and sort of what you learn about yourself when you go on the journey. But I think in this instance, and a lot of instances of films in the late 70s and early 80s, late 60s, early 70s, they were being daring. They were like, we're going to leave it up to the imagination because we're trying to be bold. And as filmmakers, we want the audience to make the decision as to what it means. I mean, look at 2001: Space Odyssey. Nobody knew what that movie meant. I know my mom still doesn't know what it means. But I think there's something.
Nor should we.
Nor should we.
Yeah.
But there's something bold and unique about allowing the audience to make their own conclusion.
Also, and we've talked about that a little bit too, and especially with the way that this movie starts, and it kind of continues that way. We're only privy to the information that our characters are privy to, so it's like it's up to them to interpret what they think. Who to believe? Should they believe what's on the news? Or should they believe what's outside the front door? Or
well, tell them not. If they could go into the future, tell them not to believe anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of history repeating.
Sure.
There is, and nobody ever says anything. I mean, that's the funny thing about Night of the Living Dead is that the news report, they don't give them any information. They're just like saying, "Oh, well, shoot him in the head." Woke up in the morgue.
Yeah.
But it's again. I mean, I think it's the characters and the relationships between the characters.
Right. Because as long as we want to sit there with the cast, like this scene right here, where this couple is talking, like just seeing their dynamic and what's important to them in this situation, like is every bit as interesting as what caused a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. And what you would do, what would you do in that situation if you had a girlfriend or a boyfriend or somebody that you needed to feel like you had to protect? I mean, that's there's such a great conflict. And I like Judith's character, and I like the fact that she really is sweet. And they're like, it's gonna be fine. Like, they have no idea what's about to happen, but they're like, oh, come on, I love you.
No, they're gonna be fine, Greg. They're gonna be fine.
Everything's fine. This is part of the grand tradition of couples being happy together on screen, and then, well, sorry, it's a 50-something-year-old movie, but I do think that, like,
but again, then there's this awful music, which I always
and also in a film that's this violent, the way that they like shot that kiss, to be so discreet, is also that for some reason that jumped out at me. Like, we're shooting zombies in the head, and then we're still sort of like obscuring a kiss with the hair.
Oh, I'd like to leave. Yes.
I don't think the movie was about the kiss.
No.
I wish at one point she would have just brushed her hair. Like, I always think it's, I don't know what it is, but I like when she sits down and she tries to talk to Barbara, and just like, who is this girl who's just sitting there on the couch, catatonic the whole time? I always like that bit where, even though there's some bad shit going on, there's still some people that are looking out for her.
Yeah. And the energy that she had was one of just like, oh, here's somebody that needs some help right now. There wasn't a lot of other questions, which is great. And also, here's the boards that are going to keep the zombies out. They're pulling out of the door with their hands.
Well,
from that side,
maybe the idea was to just deter them enough.
Yeah.
But at that point, there was only a few of them too. So as we have come to learn in countless zombie movies and TV shows. Doesn't matter how fast or slow they are, even though I'm a big slow zombie guy. I'm not a big
I
fast
was I was gonna ask you. I was gonna wait until we got up here to this little action sequence about like your preference on slow versus fast zombies.
Well, I'm a purist, I guess. It's just my love for this movie and the Romero universe. You know, I would always basically say, well, you know, that in 28 days later, the zombies are not zombies; they're infected people.
The
So
infected, yeah.
yeah. But what's funny here is that they're throwing the Molotov cocktails out the windows, and the zombies are recoiling from the fire and covering their eyes, which I always kind of thought was interesting because I think the zombies are more human in this movie than any other of the Romero films, except for maybe the zombie carrying the M16 in Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely dialed it up in future movies. I get the feeling that they were sort of finding their feet, so to speak, in terms of the actual movement. Like, how does a zombie move? What is the and it's a little bit restrained in this one, and it gets a lot more intense in future films.
Yeah, but I mean, what's always really scary about this is because it's the darkness of the field and the farm, you don't know how many zombies are out there in the distance. And I remember being a kid and watching this movie, and you feel like there's thousands of them. Like
Mm.
Yeah.
there's no way that there's not hundreds of zombies. So they're driving out there alone. They're going out into the middle of in the middle of this field. But the way it's shot, you feel like there's hundreds and hundreds of zombies around.
Yeah, there's with a few exceptions, there's not any particularly wide shots. I mean, as I say that, here's a super wide shot. But just the sequence of them getting into the car there, with just how crowded everything felt. Yeah, there's just no telling how many are out there.
And I always liked that George always kept the camera low, like the way that he shot the zombies. It made them big in frame.
Yeah.
By keeping the camera low. Um,
When it's similar too to the camera at water level in Jaws. Also, I know we've talked about Jaws a bunch.
like how can you not? I mean,
Yeah, it comes up every time.
Because Jaws was what you've cited Jaws as being one of your biggest inspirations to get into practical effects. Is that
yeah,
correct? Yeah.
yeah. Dawn of
Which
the
is
Dead
which
and
is
Jaws were the two movies.
right. So you worked on Day of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And you adored, you were such a fan of Dawn. Was working with George as you had hoped, as you had imagined, or something completely different?
Well, we became friends before I worked for him, probably 6 years, 7 years before Day of the Dead. We had become friends. I mean, the backstory is my uncle Sam was an actor, local actor, and disc jockey, and did a lot of stuff around Pittsburgh. And he was in the Crazy.
Right.
So because he was interested in film and interested in that world, he became friends with George. So when I met George, he was like, "Oh yeah, I know your uncle George. George, he interviewed me for magazine, and he was in this movie." So I was friends with George years before I officially was hired to work on Day of the Dead. Matter of fact, they had offered me a job on Creepshow to be a production assistant, but I turned the job down because I was getting ready to go away to college, pre-med to be a doctor. So, we're at the big fight scene.
Yeah, this is the mileage that they get out of this sequence is really impressive. Just in thinking about it in terms of like, limited camera and extras and moving from
I never even thought to ask if they just had one 16mm camera that they shot. Because I have a great shot of George like with the camera running through the field. I never thought about like, because now they have multiple cameras and you can shoot different angles. But I never really thought about like with a movie like this that was, over the number of nights that they had to film. But there's Cooper's twist. He's now become
oh. Cooper just
that's his transit. That's his
Yeah.
his transition as into like
making that decision.
Yeah.
Drag you out there and feed you those things.
Spooky.
I mean, you love to hate him.
You got to have a good guy to hate.
Mm-hmm.
So now this sequence here with this feeding frenzy.
Freaked me out. Well,
Yeah,
first of all, just the music, like the lack of like just that sort of low bass drone, and the idea that you see these zombies coming in and grabbing pieces of meat and fighting over intestines and chewing on bones, and it was so horrific to me when I first saw this movie.
Yeah, I mean, Greg,
these guys
I've
just scrambling for guts on the ground and in the dirt. It's incredible.
I've looked at your filmography, and you've worked on special effects in so many extremely fantastic, gory films, right? And one of them actually was Piranha 3D.
Yeah.
And listen, I know, like, I went into that movie theater thinking, oh, this is going to be like a campfire, and it was. But I was so impressed by how disgusting the special effects were, and very much in that vein, no pun intended, of just like pulling out all the body parts and just seeing guts spilled out in ways that I had never seen before.
Listen, we had a blast making that movie. I mean, Alexandria, really, we had so much fun on that film. But body parts aside, thinking about this film and what horror movies had been out to date before Night of the Living Dead came out. That shot of the guy eating the bone and then the other zombie like with the hand in the foreground and just taking pieces of meat off of it. Like there was nothing that had ever been made that was that repulsive, because films, even the vampire movies and the Hammer movies weren't that gory. Like you'd see Christopher Lee with a bunch of blood on his face, but you would never. They would very often cut away. You'd see the Dracula's cape come up, and you never saw it. But if you even look at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I prefer Night of the Living Dead over Chainsaw, even though I still think Chainsaw is genuinely terrifying. But you don't really see a lot in that movie. So much of it is implied in that film that when you get to this movie, you're actually seeing a severed hand with flesh being torn off of it and eaten. It was just gut wrenching to me, and I'd never seen anything like it. So when we get to Dawn of the Dead, of course, they stepped it up 500%.
Right.
But
Art on
the first time I saw that scene.
Yeah. Art on Discord has a question about that as well. He says, so I've heard in The Walking Dead that they've used condoms full of barbecue when they want to shoot walkers eating intestines. First of all, is that true? And also, do you know what they were actually eating in this sequence?
I don't know
what
they were actually eating in this sequence. I know that they used real entrails, like the two zombie guys that are pulling and fighting over the guts. I know they used real entrails for that. George really always sort of embraced that kind of vibe. Um, in terms of on The Walking Dead, a lot of times we would use condoms, or most of the time it was like water balloons. We would fill water balloons up with blood, and we would hand them to a zombie. And when the zombie would bite into it, I would instruct them to pull it apart as they would bite it, so the blood would sort of explode. And we did use barbecue a lot. The interesting thing is there's a lot of vinegar in the barbecue, so the vinegar would take all the makeup off right around the mouth.
Oh no.
So after like an hour, you'd have zombies with like pink lips. And I was
Just
like, what?
regular lips again.
We realized that it was the vinegar. And then there was a day where we're like, okay, just get in there and start eating. And one of the zombies was like, well, I'm a vegetarian. I can't eat that. I'm like, a vegetarian zombie. Huh.
Vegetarian zombie. Yeah.
But listen,
So did you just?
I was talking about Bill Cardell earlier, who was the local television Saturday night television host. He also was the weatherman on Channel 11. He's the interviewer. He's the guy that's doing the interviews. So for me, that was something that made it even more real. Was the guy who did the news every single day when I was growing up was doing the news reports in Night of the Living Dead. So I was like, wait a minute, I know that guy. He's a news reporter, but he's a news reporter in this movie. And a lot of the characters, a lot of the guys that are in this scene were guys that worked for George. You know, Vince Stravinsky, who was like George's accountant. He's one of the guys that is part of the hunting party. So much of all this stuff was about George just getting his pals to come down and be extras. And he's like, come on, come leave the office and get down here.
I love that. I love that so
Yeah.
much.
And anytime people do that, I mean, like you mentioned the Evil Dead films earlier, but it's always shows up on screen. Like you can always tell that people are it's just a bunch of people that are just really want to make a fun movie and putting everything they have into it.
Well, listen, you hope so. That's all you can ever hope.
Right.
People show up and want to have a good time. You know? So yeah,
the next obstacle gets presented here. The power's out now.
Yep. Good music, Sting.
Yep. And here you've got Cooper still trying to. I mean, and you can talk about this too in your work on The Walking Dead. But this dynamic about here this is a zombie movie, and then the main conflict is in the house.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the human condition. That's what the monsters are the monsters, and anytime you hear about zombie movies, there's always a metaphor for who the zombies are.
Mm-hmm.
The zombies are society consuming itself, or this or that. So in this particular instance, I think Night of the Living Dead is probably the cleanest and the most pure of. There's not a tremendous amount of sort of allegory as to what the zombies are. I think it's just George wanted to tell like a fun story, a fun, thrilling story. They wanted to make a horror movie, and I think even back in the day, if I remember, Russ Streiner, who plays Johnny, used to say, like, when they were talking about it, they were like, well, horror movies make a lot of money, and we should make a horror movie. I mean, I really have a recollection of a conversation where that was how Night of the Living Dead was born. It was like, oh, hey, you can make some money making horror movies, and we're a little company. We don't have a lot of money. But George did a lot. They did a lot of commercials in Pittsburgh before. So I think aside from the zombie eating sequence, this sequence was the most terrifying to me.
Yeah, and just the sound design too, just the constant just banging on the outside that you can't get away from.
Well, I know it's funny because I'm a little off with you guys, but there was one particular shot that just you know, when Helen is pinned up against the door and the door is starting to buckle and the hands are coming in and grabbing at her. It was so, because the way George sets up his sequences, he shows you what the monster is capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then he leaves it to your imagination. Like in Dawn of the Dead, like in the opening scene where you see the zombie bite into the woman's neck. That's all you need to see when you know what the zombies are capable of. So the way that Night of the Living Dead works is you see that great scene in the truck when the zombies are tearing the intestines apart. You know what these people have in store for them coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So when Harry gets shot and he falls down the steps and he crawls towards his daughter's body.
Which is exactly what we're seeing right now, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I think, you know, even though when we last saw Karen, you know, we weren't sure what was going to happen to her, I think it's you know, at this point in the film, even if you didn't know the zombie rule, pretty much a given what's going to happen with Karen. And that makes this scene all the more terrifying with him being down there with her in the state that he's in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's funny. The first time I saw it, I didn't even think about it. I just thought, oh, he's going down to be with his daughter.
Here we go. And again, it's that taboo that we were talking about. There's something just so incredibly disturbing about seeing her. To me, this is akin to Reagan peeing on the floor in The Exorcist. It's just such an unnerving sequence.
Well, not only that, but when you see that she's eaten part of his arm away. So the little girl, I always was fascinated with that little chunk of meat that's in her hand. But then you get into the weird kind of Alfred Hitchcock Psycho.
Stabbing her mom with a garden trowel.
You know, it's funny. I always was like, she takes the trough off the wall to stab her, and just the echoey, the weird, scary echo.
There's shadow on the wall with the blood dripping down.
Strange because she didn't eat her. She just stabbed her.
Greg, in your opinion, like, you know, you've had so many different types of zombies in The Walking Dead. Is there kind of one type of zombie, whether it be an age thing, whether it be a gender thing, I don't know, that you kind of know will always terrify audiences? Because for me, it's always a little kid.
I don't know. Wait, we got to go back, because right where you're saying is right where we're talking right now. When Johnny comes in and grabs Barbara, that shot gave me nightmares, because it's what you don't see that happens to her. You know what's going to happen to her. But when that hand comes in with the black glove on and you see her face and he grabs her, that to me is the most terrifying zombie you can ever have. It's somebody that you would never expect to be responsible for your death. So when he grabs her and he pulls her into the crowd and he hugs her and spins away, and you see those other zombies on the outside of the shot circling. The idea that we don't see what happens to the heroine, the lead woman in the movie, that was so traumatizing to me. I had nightmares for weeks.
Well, and that's what this whole sequence is built on, right? I mean, because you've got this couple's little girl, their daughter, kills them and eats them. It's like, I mean, you're talking about the scariest zombie is the one that you don't expect, like,
and the one that you don't want more than anyone to eat.
That's the most terrifying thing is like imagining that your kid is just this brainless thing that all they want to do is kill you, and then your own brother, you know, you get swallowed up into the swarm of zombies, and like, it's not that the violence is what's so terrifying about it. It's the act of you know, it was your brother or it was your little girl that did it to you.
The indescribable loss of the humanity, that connection that you have with that person. And listen, The Walking Dead has done that very well in a number of instances, but it doesn't matter, because Night of the Living Dead is what did it to begin with. And those music things when the eyes open right here.
Well, and here
I mean,
we have that like sort of insect kind of at the base of your skull, digital sounding little drone that is just the music in this sequence is so great.
and Greg, I love that you're, giving kudos to Night of the Living Dead, absolutely, as it, that this is why we're watching it, because it's so seminal. But The Walking Dead has done it very well. Has there been kind of a favorite sequence that kind of is in step with this, where there has been a sort of a devastating kill,
Well,
a devastating one that is particularly stuck
there's
with you?
probably two. I think in Walking Dead in season 1, when Amy comes back, Lori Holden is holding Emma Bell, and her eyes open, and she's there looking into her eyes, just to try to find some bit of humanity there. Like I'm not gonna this. She's not going to be a zombie. She's going to be my sister.
Yeah.
And then in the end of season 2, Sophia coming out of the barn, middle of season 2, sorry. Again, it's just that tragic sense of loss. But you can't mourn them, and you can't comprehend that they're gone, because they're still walking around. They're still coming towards you. So I felt like those two particular instances, both written by Frank Darabont, which really is what I think made The Walking Dead so phenomenally successful. Was it opened the zombie genre to a wider audience with those moments, like Sophia walking out of the barn. Literally, I remember reading scripts for the first half of season 2, and I genuinely was anxious for what I would do in that situation, because they were running around, they didn't know where to go, they ended up at Herschel's farm. I was really anxious about it. And then to end that whole journey with the futility of, as strong as those people were, as capable as those people were, none of them could save her. That's the tragedy, and that's what makes that moment resonate so much. Is Rick was a hero, Daryl was a hero, Glenn, they were all very capable of taking care of themselves and looking out for their people, but they couldn't stop that from happening. And that was why that moment just was so powerful.
Yeah, 100%.
There's Bill Cardell again.
Yeah, there's all.
And by the way, because he hosted the Saturday night Chiller Theater in Pittsburgh, like I watched that every night religiously when I was a kid. And his daughter ended up starring in Day of the Dead. Lori Cardell is Bill Cardell's daughter.
Oh, wow.
So the lead actress.
Horror families.
Yeah.
Bill passed away, I want to say 3 years ago, and I had spoken to him a couple of weeks before he passed away, and he was like, "Greg, I'm so proud of you. I just love that you followed your dream." And I would say, "Bill, I'm doing this because of you. You used to show horror movies on Saturday night, and you inspired me." And he'd always get a little squirrely when I would say that. And I would
That's
say, like,
great.
"No, you don't understand. You made those movies accessible to me, and because of you, my imagination exploded with these great monster movies." And he'd be like, "No, stop, that's not true." But he really was. I mean, I would love to give a tremendous amount of credit to the people that made these movies accessible to us when we were younger. Because if we hadn't have seen Night of the Living Dead, if I hadn't seen it when I saw it, who knows what would have happened. And to the directors and the filmmakers, that they wanted to buck the system, and they wanted to be bold, and they wanted to be mavericks, and I'm forever indebted to those filmmakers. And I'm just excited that I got to work with them, and I get to be friends with them, and continue to collaborate with them. And like George and Wes Craven and Toby, who passed away. And listen, man, those guys were the real deal, and they helped shape this entire world that we're living in.
Yeah, that's great. So here's we're into the little epilogue of the of the film here, the morning after, and even just watching the hunting party kind of cruise through and just really just take out all these zombies really matter of factly almost is such a strange change of pace.
And Greg, I'm really, really intrigued to hear what, like, obviously once everyone watching can see the ending, I'm really intrigued to hear what your initial response to the ending was when you first saw the film.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about the militia and the people taking guns and taking the law into their own hands and taking to the countryside hunting is just, at the time you're like, sure, that's what people would have done, but then we have the ending, and I remember the first time I saw this movie, I was in shock. Like
Yeah, I mean, there it is. Yeah.
I kept waiting for something else to happen. But then the way that George finishes the film by showing the freeze frame, the grainy kind of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Again, I mean, these have so many parallels.
Well, and it looks like newspaper clippings, right? Like
you see the one guy come in with the meat hook, and you realize that Dwayne Jones' character has been relegated to a piece of meat that they're going to pick up with a meat hook and hoist him on top of the fire, and then you see those images. There's something so cinema verite about it, that it has that realism that you're like, did I just see that?
Yeah.
It looks real. It looks real. And a lot of people always talk about the fact that that the United States was at war, and the way that people got their information about the war was through black and white footage and newspaper photos and stuff. So it had that sort of sense of realism to it, because that's what people were accustomed to seeing at the time.
I still find it, like, even watching that now, I still get chills from that. Like, I remember watching it for the first time, I was like, what? That's how it ends. It's such a powerful, unexpected, cynical, but beautifully cynical ending.
Well, and it stays with you. I mean, you can't shake it. It's not like, okay, let's go have some ice cream now. Like,
right.
Let's go get Burger King.
And you just don't. You can't recover from it, because it's brilliant and perfect. And I can't imagine the movie ending any other way than it did.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, as difficult an ending as it is to kind of swallow in the moment, like, thinking about the movie as a whole, I don't know how else you could have, like, it wouldn't be the same movie with a different ending.
Yeah, and it's not, and that's probably why the remake was a little confusing for people, because it's like, that ending is so important to what the movie is. But.
Yeah. Well, Greg, thank you for watching that with us. If you got time, I'd love to ask you there's a few other questions that we pulled from the crowd while we were watching it.
I was waiting for my computer to explode, so
and it did.
Well, we're not done yet. So Skoma, who was watching on IGN in the IGN chat, said, "This has been great hanging out. Do you have any other favorite zombie movies that you haven't worked on?" Skoma offers Dead Alive or Reanimator, perhaps.
Well, I gotta, Shaun of the Dead. Shaun of the Dead is probably in my top 10 favorite movies to begin with.
Nice.
And I love it. It's such a great movie, and I'm really blessed to call the guys my friends. So if I could have worked on Shaun of the Dead, that would have been pretty great. But I got to, I had characters named after me in Hot Fuzz, and I got to work with the guys. So I consider myself very fortunate. But, everything else, I've worked on all. I didn't work on any of the Resident Evil movies, even though I enjoyed the first two movies a lot, actually. I worked on Bride of Reanimator. So I think I've worked on pretty much every other movie since 1988. But in terms of zombie movies, I love 28 Days Later too. I mean, not that that's a zombie movie, but I think Shaun of the Dead would be one that, we joke around in the shop sometimes, like if you could go back in time and work on any movie, like you have to pick three. It's like Creature from Black Lagoon or King Kong, and it's always fun to hear what people what they decide they would want to work on.
Cool. Trading Cards and More on IG and YouTube asks, what has been, you touched on this a little bit, but what has been your favorite episode of The Walking Dead to work on, and why?
Well, it's hard because we've been doing it for so long that there are episodes that I forget about. And then I go back to it, and I'll tell you, there was an episode in season 6, episode 9, where the zombies invade Alexandria at night. And it's when the church falls in the previous episode, and it's the episode where Carl gets shot in the eye, and I directed that episode, and the original production schedule had us shooting the entire episode during the day. And Scott Gimple, who wrote it, Scott and I really felt that it needed to be at night. And I said, guys, this is our Night of the Living Dead episode. This is our opportunity to have zombies invade this area and shoot it at night and use the fog and use the blue nighttime lighting and really play up the idea that this is as close as we're going to get to an homage to Night of the Living Dead as we're ever going to get. And I forgot about that episode because and then somebody said, wait, there was this really cool episode. I went, oh, wait, I remember. I directed that episode.
Oh, that was...
But listen, the show, I'm proud of what the actors have done. I'm proud of what the crew has done. There's been people that have been on the show for 10 years. And it's not an easy show to produce. It's very challenging because we have very lofty expectations for our action sequences. And, we shoot them in 8 days, and we don't have 28 days and $14 million an episode to shoot the show. So we got to embrace the horror element and embrace what's great about it and the characters and stuff. So I think everybody involved in the show really has done a great job. So I would say that episode, and of course Frank's pilot, is still to me the best episode of the series. But listen, the show's still on. There's still another episode that I directed that's going to come on hopefully sometime, because I did the finale this year, but we pushed it. I don't know when it's going to be on. But I got to direct the episode a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to spoil it for people. But there was a big action scene, and then there was big character deaths and all this crazy stuff that went on. And I had a great time shooting that episode. It was a really fun script, and the actors love it, and everybody's there for the same reason. So,
yeah. Greg, we have to ask: is there a plan for the ending of The Walking Dead?
Not that I know. I don't. And trust me, a lot of us. I'm curious myself always as to how long the show will go, because I've been on the show for a long time, and my kids are going to be 11 years older than when I started the show, because I started 11 years ago. But there's a lot of story to tell in the world, and this season has been really strong. I think Angela and the writers have done a great job of crafting some really compelling storylines that have taken us on a great journey. So I don't know, but trust me, I've asked.
I do trust you.
I believe you. Yeah.
So, any thoughts about when we're going to wrap it up? Because maybe I want to get back. And there's another show that I work on, and I wouldn't mind running off and doing some other stuff. But Creepshow's kept me busy in the hiatus, and I'm excited that the show drops on DVD May 19th.
Yeah.
And AMC's going to air the entire first season of Creepshow on the network. So it's pretty cool. I mean, that's as close as I can get to saying thank you to George for everything that he's done for me by retelling Creepshow with new directors and new writers and even some old school Stephen King writing. So
yeah. No, that's great. Well, in mid-May, May 19th, that's far enough away. We'll have to have you back so we can watch some Creepshow with you.
I don't think I'm going anywhere for the time being.
Right. Odds are
I might move that over there, and I might move that. I don't know. I might move
yeah. Well, it'll be worth checking in just to see what you've done with the Wolfman and the pod.
Yes. If I came in one day and the Wolfman was standing on top of the pod, I'd probably have a heart attack.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Greg, for being here. And we really appreciate you watching Night of the Living Dead with us. And everybody that's been watching at home, if you did miss this stream, some of the stream, or if you just want to watch it again, the whole thing will live on as a VOD. So make sure to queue up Night of the Living Dead. Again, it's playing for free in lots of places, so you can watch it along with this commentary. And again, Greg Nicotero, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. That was great, guys.
Really enjoyed it.
Let me know when you want to do it again. It was a blast.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.